Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Our next speaker we have is also London-based. We'd like to introduce Anais. In fact, Anais, you could do your introduction. I'm just going to minimize and be quiet now. Cheers.
No worries.
Enjoy your talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited to be joining you all here and the amazing lineup of speakers that have been both yesterday and today. I hope you had a good lunch break, a lovely lunch break. And if you're still munching on, just enjoy your meal as I dive into my journey into modernizing digital cognitive assessments by creating a design system. My name is Anais Hristea. I'm a UX developer at Cambridge Cognition, just shy of like half a year or so. And today I'll be presenting my design thinking in the clinical UX space, the UX of cognitive assessments, as well as using design systems to officially modernize digital assessments used in research. Now, just a little bit about me. Sorry, I'm on multiple screens. As mentioned, I'm based in London, UK, just Southeast London. I've been a UX developer with Cambridge Cognition since November of last year. And just a bit of my background, I've been trained in computer science, but I always been nurturing this innate curiosity about human-computer interaction. I love to understand better what makes people use certain elements on the screen and what certain elements of the screen makes it more efficient for them to do their tasks on a daily basis. In my spare time, I really love doing some crafts. As you can see, a lot of paper crafts lately for Blade Runner fans. Yes, indeed, that first picture is of the unicorn used in the movie. And a little bit about Cambridge Cognition, the company that I'm working at. They're a leading neuroscience technology company optimizing the assessment of cognition for better brain health research with scientifically validated digital health solutions. Our products and services range between clinical trial support, digital health solutions, and cognitive assessments. And just to give you a bit of a bigger idea, a few numbers, just to understand the space that we're living in. Our technology has been used in over 2,600 clinical studies with partners across the industry as well as the academia, as you can see the many logos on the right-hand side of the screen. And we've had overall just over 1 million patients assessed on our digital health apps in clinical trials. So we have quite a big pool of users that we interact with using our technologies. But to understand better the UX space in which we work in, because it's quite a niche industry, and don't worry, like if you don't understand exactly what cognitive assessments do or what clinical trials are going on, it took me like a few months to explain to my peers and family what I'm doing. So don't worry if it sounds a bit alien to you. I'm here to explain everything out, and hopefully you'll end up having a better understanding of clinical UX by the end of this talk. So let's start with basics. Let's say for the sake of this presentation that we're defining UX as the interaction experiences people have with anything designed. Pretty simple, pretty direct. So if we're taking this definition and go deeper into healthcare UX, the topic that we're all discussing in these 2 days, the definition to that would end up being into the interaction and experiences people have with healthcare technology and services. Think about a fitness app, maybe having a blood test, interacting with healthcare insurance. All of this requires a knowledge of healthcare, behavior change theory, medical law and ethics, and so on. So if we're taking this definition and really look at clinical UX, which is just filtering it down even more, clinical UX could be defined as the interaction experiences clinicians and patients have with healthcare technology and services. So think a little bit more into the realm of insulin infusion pump, digital therapeutics, electronic medical records, which oftentimes requires deeper knowledge of clinical pathways, health assessment, medical records, regulatory affairs, and so on. Now, this being such a niche UX space, we have to think about exactly what is the environment in which our users are coming to interact with our products. So we have to look at the user journey of patients through a clinical trial, which oftentimes have 6 main steps, starting with recruitment. So at each given step, they have different dynamic with the study staff. And there are different concerns that arise in these steps. So starting with recruitment, this is the first time patients learn about the trial. It could be either through a patient organization, through their physician, or marketed materials. However, the main concerns here are about how much time they have to dedicate to this, how much disruption it will come into their daily routine, as well as worries around the possible negative side effects of the drug that they will be taking through this clinical trial. Afterwards, they have to go through screening, which is quite a demanding step. It can be taken as a very personal affront if they do not get selected for the study, even though it's not personal. It's mainly just to confirm their eligibility for the study, which is important for us here because we're looking at patients who have an official diagnostic of certain impairments rather than people who are self-diagnosing themselves. So this might be a stressful moment for patients as they can be excluded if they don't meet the criteria the sponsor has defined. And next up is a very key point for me in this clinical trial journey, and that is the informed consent. This is an essential step both for the sponsor and the patients. Here, the patients read all about the risks and benefits of participating in the study and decide whether they want to proceed or not. The main pain point here is the information given that can sometimes be too technical for the patients, for the public, essentially. And they can't understand enough to make a reasonable decision whether they want to participate or not in the study. This is a crucial moment from my point of view because as a patient, understanding what the study is about and being comfortable with it can ultimately establish trust before the measuring starts, as well as having potential to empower the patient to participate in multiple visits across the clinical trial. And after the informed consent, there is the randomization. So patients are randomized to either the investigational drug or placebo, which is usually the standard of care for their indication. And oftentimes there are concerns here about the side effects impact on their daily life. So we're taking the consent that we have at the beginning of the study, and here is even more emphasized, even more obvious. After the randomization comes obviously the study visits, so the actual core of the study, of the clinical trial, where patients are making regular visits to the site for lab tests and checkups. Visits also give the patients a chance to tell the investigator if they've been having any issues or if they have any concerns whatsoever. So this is a very good opportunity for patients to interact with the study staff and flesh out any misunderstandings or any clarifications that need to be had. The main pain points here, however, is the time that they're dedicating to actually visit the site. The frequency of visits might impact their work. Traveling to the site requires them to take time, as well as the logistics afterwards of getting reimbursed for that travel can last quite a long time. Not to mention also the anxiety over just treatment deficiency, because they are not aware whether they're taking the placebo or the actual drug. So there's a lot of anxiety overlapping most of this journey through a study. And lastly, there is the end of trial, while patients hand over their patient journals, questionnaires, and any leftover study drug and agree on the next steps with their investigator. They could have follow-ups over a long time afterwards. Overall, the concerns here about the interaction or the availability of the drugs post-study, as well as just their individual performance results and study results. Oftentimes in cognitive clinical trials, they go through certain tests that would assess their mental performance essentially in certain psychometric values. So they're really just interested for their own understanding and just figuring out how they can basically help themselves afterwards, knowing the information that they found out during the study. So looking at cognitive assessments in particular, cognitive assessments, as I said, they are present at this part of the clinical trial, which is the study visits and monitoring. This is the main space in which we as Cambridge Cognition operate, or at least our technologies operate. We offer services outside of this particular step, but today I'll be talking purely about cognitive assessments. And just to give you an idea of the space of cognitive assessments, here are just a few examples in the wild of different sort of mind games, if you'd like to call them like that, but they're not mind games. Just looking at these 5 different cognitive assessments, we can already see a big variation in UI style, ranging between material design to the very top left, and all the way to standard form input elements to the right, for example. There's a huge variation in background colors, which shows the industry's desire to make these tasks more engaging, as participants have to perform them repeatedly within a given study. And just like their versions on pen and paper quite a couple of decades ago in research, they deal with numbers, words, and images as the primary stimuli that they're using. Now, where does Cambridge Cognition sit with their Cantab battery of tests? We have quite several tasks that use measurements across multiple cognitive domains, and as well as assessing disease progression. They're also assessing disease severity as well as treatment response by using reliable psychometric properties. There are overall over 250 disorders that we assess using our digital neuroscience technologies. So that's quite a big pool of users that we have there. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have different platforms that we're using for our tests. There are different types of interaction as well. There's audio stimuli, there's visual stimuli, and quite inconsistent UI across all of them. But the challenges don't stop here. Now, I want to bring up the subject of personas. If you've had the chance or the time to listen to Grace's talk before the lunch break, she also mentioned how annoying it is that the personas are not quite well defined. So I'm here to just add up to that point, essentially. By just looking at the definition that we had in the beginning about clinical UX. So I'm taking it here and just duplicating it in the sense that interaction experiences clinicians and patients have with, and I'm updating it for the sake of the narrative of this presentation, with cognitive assessments. Now, it's pretty clear from this definition that we have two personas, right? We have clinicians and patients. But suddenly, updating it to cognitive assessments, it complicates things. Just looking at the measurements we provide and the studies already published, we've identified this list of user groups, besides obviously the healthy controls, which are very useful data points too. We have patients across dementia diseases, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, stroke, depression, schizophrenia, and multiple sclerosis, but also we care about caregivers as well as the clinicians who are operating in the space. On a more demographical level, we are interacting with people as young as 3 years old or to the eldest. So we have a very large spectrum of people that we're interacting with, as well as loads of other languages. And we've identified that we have a few data gaps in terms of including minority groups into our space. So those are quite a few things that we need to take into account when we want to develop our user research strategy. And honestly, 7 personas is not great, is it? Having all of these just separate personas doesn't make any sense. It's very complicated. It becomes very complex. And it doesn't help out with what patterns are emerging with all of these groups, or what exactly each group needs from just a normal UI or a cognitive assessment. So something that I really like as a solution to that persona is actually changing to a persona spectrum. Now, for those of you who maybe haven't heard of this before, this is a toolkit developed by Microsoft Design back in 2015, if I remember correctly, where they explored essentially how they can change the UX processes that we're going through today to include more and more people. And I really like this method because not only is it obviously used in inclusive design methodology, but it dives into the full range of human diversity, while at the same time being a very quick tool to show how a product scales to a broader audience. It kind of feeds into the theory that Grace had as well before the lunch break, in which we should think of them as actors and characters, essentially. And that's exactly what I was thinking about for our own personas at Cambridge Cognition. We have diseases spanning across different cognitive domains, so having impairments across different cognitive domains, such as memory, language, executive function, visual spatial skills, processing speed, as well as others, as we introduce more and more cognitive impairments into the list of our users. But also we have different levels of exposure to that impairment, We have obviously the long-term ones, patients and clinical staff who are dedicated to this space and this space only. And then more on the shorter term, we have carers as well as study managers who might not be fully involved into the space of that cognitive impairment, but they still have some sort of regular interaction with that disease, and they have some level of knowledge of that disease as well. And on the other end of the spectrum, we also have no exposure to that impairment or very little, which are essentially the healthy controls that would be used to just make sure that we are measuring the right things and we can translate the measures into reliable insights as well as performance results. So knowing all of this, knowing the user journey of patients, the context in which we are operating, the environment, the things that they come with when interacting with our products, as well as understanding what are their concerns and pain points stemming from the cognitive impairments that they have and the struggles that they may have, I have suggested creating a design system to just unite all of that and sort out the challenge of having so many different platforms that we're operating on. So if you don't know what a design system is, think of it as a structured approach to creating and maintaining consistent user interfaces, sort of like a paint tree, a collection of UI elements for a kitchen, the product UI. And usually design systems are thought of from an atomic design methodology. So think of very simply put, very briefly put, an overview. I haven't dived too much into details here, but essentially think of like the smallest elements being atoms, sort of like color, maybe fonts and typography. And then at a higher level, a combination of atoms, maybe molecules. That would be the most basic UI elements they'd be using. Think buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons, and so on, which ultimately combined together, they can form organisms. Think about like maybe card elements, or maybe the header space on this website, actually, on Codecast. These are all just different levels of complexity of UI elements overall. So having a united repository that would have all of these in one place can very easily be very efficient and productive into just creating a faster development. But I'll dive into that just a sec. So the anatomy of design system, taking from atomic design methodology, would essentially have these three main parts, but it can obviously be changing depending on the needs of your company, how big the company is, how big the portfolio of products are. But most of the times we would have these different repositories, essentially. So we will start with foundations, where we define design principles, colors, typography, iconography, layouts and grids, spacing. And then the components part will be taking all of this insights, all of these guidelines, and applying them to the most smallest UI elements, UI puzzle pieces, if you like, such as buttons, form inputs, alerts, badges, and so on. Taking all of these and applying them into design patterns, we end up having cards, tables, and drawers, and so on. So in a very brief, short overview of design systems, they're essentially this structure. And if you're curious about how they look like and you haven't seen them, I absolutely 100% recommend you have a look at the Microsoft Fluent Design, Google Material Design, and Apple Human Interface Guidelines. They're usually the leading design systems on the market. I always refer to those, especially because we're working with their platform. So it's good to know what are the design requirements from their side that we can fit within. But also, if you're interested more into the healthcare space, the Edison design system is a great design system to be looking at. And for those folks who are designing for the British population, please have a look at the National Health System design system. As it's very nice. I've been using it beforehand. Great principles as well, and just easy to follow too. So coming back to the benefits of the design system, it's pretty clear that it brings a lot of benefits, doesn't it? Not just for the design team, but also for multiple teams across the company. It starts with guaranteeing there is a UI consistency across products and platform by making sure that All the design choices are backed by user research from the start, and everything has been designed mobile first, as well as built with accessibility in mind. There's also faster design and development of products by spending less time on designing new projects and having a one repository to rule them all, which enables faster and easier implementation, especially for new products. It also enables scalability towards other platforms as well as faster speed to market. And all of these, in turn, lead to a shift in dynamics from redesign to innovation once fully implemented. Now, putting it all together, when I submitted this talk back in January, I thought I'll be able to show you all a glimpse of our new and shiny design system. Oh, how much I underestimated the situation. But I do have something similar to show you today that I hope you find as exciting as I do, and that is a design system for visual stimuli. Now, remember on the slide when I mentioned that cognitive assessments use text, numbers, and images as stimuli? Well, when it comes to visual imagery, our brains interpret them in many different ways, such as assigning meaning or adjusting memory performance based on the individual's familiarity to the subject presented. In our cognitive assessments that use such imagery, we have these abstract illustrations which were developed specifically for these tasks around 30 years ago. So when I was hired by Cambridge Cognition, the main challenge that I had was how can we modernize these and just bring them back to the 21st century, essentially. And that's where my project has started, where I looked at what is it about these stimuli that we require. Looking across all the cognitive tasks, we have certain requirements, such as making sure that there are simple shapes, that there are no small details, especially for the mobile platforms as well as the watch platform. Making sure that they're memorable enough for next day use, as these cognitive assessments are being interacted with on a regular basis. And such, in some tasks, certain stimuli have to be remembered across different days. So they have to also be universally, they have to be culturally universal. So not assigning specific meanings, say using emojis, for example. Some emojis may mean different things in different cultures, and that would just add a lot of noise in the quality of data that we get out of these cognitive assessments. So during this workshop that I've had with a couple of scientists in my team, as well as across the company, we've just drilled down into the exact characteristics that we need for these stimuli, and just figuring out what is the best approach to go forward with. So besides the memorability and the cultural universality, sorry, English is not my first language. We also thinking about, having gestalt qualities to these stimuli, and making sure that these stimuli are interactable. They're obvious on the screen. The user knows what to do with those stimuli without having to be presented with a novel with a big text of instructions. After all, that's not engaging enough for people. And I was in luck, as while I was thinking about all of these characteristics and how the new stimuli should look like, we had in our roadmap a new task that we wanted to push into the market, and which is visual spatial precision. Now you can see it on the left side. The old version of this was using emojis, but really what the users do with this task is they have to remember that sequence of 5 emojis or 5 images and their location on screen. And then they have to place the 5 images at their locations and in the order shown previously. So they have to remember these 2 things. This task also is being used at a high frequency tempo. So one study can have 5 days in which they're using this task twice a day, and they would have different sets of 5 images coming all the time. So it won't be the same set of 5 images, it will always be a different set of 5 images. So the stimuli also must be distinctive but memorable enough. And progressing from that, we looked exactly at what are the requirements for this task in particular to sort of define the foundations, essentially, of this design system. We really needed to take into account, again, they need to be distinctive enough, but still memorable. So we had two levels that we were looking at. One is within a set of stimuli, so that would be the one set of 5 images on the screen, and then thinking more at an individual stimulus level. Within a set, we were just thinking about how we can diversify, but also keep it abstract, keep it, less nameable. So we've landed on an idea of having families of stimuli, so different ways of creating these stimuli that would make them different enough, but still keep within the requirements that we've established beforehand. Since all of these stimuli are quite small images on the mobile screen, I figured that a good approach would be to have a radial grid behind them, so it looks more like a button. So it's more clear that that is an interactable element on the screen. On a stimulus level, we were just going back and forth thinking, what is the ideal illustration type that can be used to maintain the requirements that we have, the scientific requirements that we have within a task. And we've landed on geometric shapes, really. They're universally recognizable and they have low nameability. A triangle is a triangle, a square is a square, a circle is a circle. But as I said, we needed, for example, for the 5-day study of 2 sessions daily, we would have needed around 50 individual assets. And usually our tasks are used across multiple months, not just within a week. So we're looking at actually generating hundreds and hundreds of stimuli assets. So how do we go around that? And what I really liked was taking inspiration from design movements. So think about maybe Bauhaus movement or the Memphis movement, where they're taking geometric shapes, combining them, subtracting them. This is how I played with different shapes. As you can see, they're all based from a square, triangle, and circle, but they've either been combined or subtracted from each other. And they're still pretty abstract themselves, and they don't have that necessarily that big meaning, very obvious in your face, like maybe we're having a star or something. But those are just the small pieces that would be used in the final stimuli. So these are my components that I've used to create the final stimuli, which are the patterns in our case, basically. So here I'm presenting to you 5 different families. The first 2 on the top left, we call them Scandiform at the moment, where I've just taken one element, one component essentially, and duplicating it 3 more times within that radial grid, and just maintaining a dual tone palette here. The reason behind that was, again, we wanted to avoid assigning meaning to colors while still maintaining, the brand identity within the task, making sure that we're not risking making too many stimuli that would look the same. Frankly, after generating how many? I think 100 so far, I haven't had that issue at all. So far, the dual tone really works. On the top right-hand side, it was a very fun thing for us to play around, essentially generating blob-like shapes. Just taking a couple of anchor points on the radial grid. We've created a program or an algorithm to be generating those and creating a sort of like polygon version. And then I just took that polygon and curvified it and making sure that it doesn't look like bad stuff, but it still is pretty distinctive and pretty non-nameable per se. And then a third family of stimuli that I've created on the bottom left, which we call them jigsaw, essentially taking the components from the previous slide and placing them sort of like card suits. So having this square grid more so. And afterwards, I've just taken a page from the Memphis trend as well, where they essentially apply a pattern to a geometric shape and then place a normal, for example, I've taken just a normal solid color shape and put it underneath or maybe on top of that pattern. And lastly, I just looked at the components and just duplicated them and made them dual tone to just finalize the whole range of families that we wanted to look into and apply in this task. So the end result is here. You can see it before and after. We've changed to a white background to fall into all the other cognitive assessments that we're using on this platform. They've all been using a white background, so we've shifted to that. And we've also made the stimuli, as you can see, a bit more obvious. What I like very much to do and to say about my work is always to find a good analogy to the new solution. And just looking at these two screenshots while I was doing the slides, I figured they look exactly like the pieces on a checkers board when you slide onto the board, essentially. And I thought that is a great analogy, and it's exactly what we wanted to end up having, essentially, to make this more engaging, to make this less of a pure clinical test and more something that you can enjoy spending as much time as possible on and still come back to it multiple times and still enjoying it. So thanks for listening. I know I've been a bit short today. I was Anais Hristea from Cambridge Cognition, and if you wish to contact me online, you can find me on LinkedIn as well as on Twitter, although I'm not that active on Twitter. And if you wish to find out more about Cambridge Cognition, feel free to check our website at cambridgecognition.com. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Anais. I really appreciate it. It was great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Hey, it's only a pleasure. I think you spoke well. I think we need more engagements around that. I don't think we speak enough about user experience within the healthcare setting. I think we generally generalize user experience, but healthcare is more sort of niche.
Absolutely.
Niche. I just said niche.
Niche. I'm on the sticker with that now.
Yeah, UX is niche.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. We're going to pop over to our next talk with Emma and Lee. Thanks again, and we'll see everyone at our next chat. Cheers.
Bye.